In the past two Formula 1 races at Monza, the Italian national anthem rang out in deference to its winner. But this time, instead of celebrating a Ferrari victory, it was Pierre Gasly and the AlphaTauri team who took the win in an incredibly topsy-turvy race. And while Gasly earned the plaudits for a calm and assured performance in the lead for his first ever win, Ferrari suffered arguably one of its most miserable and lacklustre performances of its F1 tenure. In isolation, Sebastian Vettel's early brake failure and Leclerc's heavy crash at the Parabolica were both bad enough. Ferrari's hopes were dashed by half distance, and it was a legacy of Leclerc's crash that set Gasly on his course towards a famous and unexpected victory. But Ferrari's rotten performance extended beyond the race. Every single session at Monza told a story of toil for the team that had bested its competition last year in swaggering style. Vettel summed it up best, suggesting that it was probably good that there were no fans in attendance to watch any hopes of Ferrari scraping a few points disappear within the first 23 laps. For months, since the SF1000's shortcomings became all too apparent in testing and the opening races, the crystal ball had long predicted a Ferrari struggle. And so, a week after the Scuderia returned to its homeland after a chastening experience at Spa-Francorchamps, it will now look towards the next race at Mugello after being comprehensively routed at Monza. First, let's take a look at the new parts that Ferrari brought to Monza to try and boost its straight-line performance at the Temple of Speed, and then address our 4-point plan of how Ferrari can proceed from its current pit of despair. With a particularly flawed power unit in 2020, which we'll get to in a bit, Ferrari had to really dial back the drag to compensate for the lack of power driving the car forwards. The top flap of the front wing was seriously trimmed out to tackle Monza, featuring a much shorter chord inboard section to relieve some of the pressure off of the wing. The cars still required downforce in the slower speed sections to get the right response at the front and enough traction on exit, so it's all a fine balancing act. Trimming out the front wing balances out with the much smaller rear wing, which appears to be the same specification trialled in FP1 at Spa last weekend. Instead of reducing the angle of attack of the DRS-activated top flap as they did for the rest of the Spa weekend, it was considerably shorter in chords to limit the drag produced, powering with a low camber main plane mounted further up. But none of those additions could really help Ferrari. Vettel was eliminated in Q1, while Leclerc could only qualify 13th for the race he won last year. So where does Ferrari go from here? The rest of the circuits on the calendar shouldn't be as draining as Monza and Spa, although the Bahrain races will be a challenge, but the team doesn't have much scope to rescue the 2020 season. Car development for 2021 is also severely limited too, meaning that Ferrari will have to limp on into next year with a flawed chassis. The chance of making the same mistakes next year is far too high, and Ferrari can either choose to accept that or wrest control of its own fate. In other words, how do you solve a problem like Maranello? Number 1. Find something from the power unit. For 2020, Ferrari had focused on tacking more downforce onto its latest chariot, able to accept that it could trade off a little bit more with the strengths of its previous spec power plant. Had last year's powertrain made it onto the back of this year's car, you'd bet that Vettel and Leclerc would have enjoyed a much better run in 2020. The FIA's application of technical directives at the tail end of last year scythed away at Ferrari's advantage and left the team and customer outfits Haas and Alfa Romeo with a sudden shortfall. As engines and other power unit components have to be homologated prior to the season, that left Ferrari with no time to make up the deficit. As we've mentioned previously, the technical directives that took aim at Ferrari's design focused on the combustibles in the engine. At Austin, following a Red Bull inquiry, the FIA issued a clarification on fuel flow regulations, but Ferrari had reportedly sidestepped them with a loophole. The fuel flow sensor, mandated by the FIA at the advent of the turbo hybrid regulations, measures for the 100 kg/h maximum fuel flow allowed in intervals. The suggestion was that Ferrari was pumping fuel into the engine at a higher rate than that around the intervals, having been able to account for them in the data available. Another technical directive was issued in Brazil, explicitly stating that flammable liquids in the ancillary PU components could not be used for combustion, suggesting that Ferrari was leaking flammable oil into the combustion chamber to enrich the fuel injected into each cylinder. Lastly, Ferrari publicly fell foul of a directive on the fuel declared at the start of each race. Leclerc's car was spot-checked before the season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and was found to have a different level of fuel on board the car compared to the quantity declared to the FIA pre-race. Now, Leclerc was able to keep his third-place finish, but Ferrari was handed a €50,000 fine post-race for that discrepancy in fuel load. Ferrari and the FIA reached an undisclosed settlement prior to the start of the 2020 season, to the dismay of other teams on the grid, with no detail over the rules that Ferrari had broken. But team principal Mattia Binotto had since disclosed that technical directives had indeed wiped out some of the performance from his team's power unit, and for 2020 the FIA added a secondary encrypted fuel flow sensor that the teams could not sidestep. Over the next off-season, Ferrari will have a chance to recover and redesign parts of its powertrain within the FIA's boundaries. The restrictions enforced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic have limited Ferrari's options, but it can at least make improvements and hope that the other power unit manufacturers on the grid don't make as many gains heading into 2021. Where the team is significantly more limited is in the design of its car. In the pursuit of more downforce, Ferrari ended up lumbering its latest chariot with a hefty burden of drag. The aero department will be working to improve the overall efficiency of the car, in a bid to turn down the coefficient of drag figure without losing too much performance. It's a tight balancing act, but there are options available to Ferrari, and it must pursue all of them. Number 2. Bolster the team's personnel and look outside the family. Binotto had to carry the mantle of both team principal and technical director for 2019, and it was only in August that he revealed he had stepped down from a technical capacity within the team. Rather than appoint a new technical director figurehead, Ferrari has created a new performance development division within the team, headed by Enrico Cardillo, the team's former head of aerodynamics. Now, promoting from within is admirable, and it's always great to see new heads of state get a chance to flex their muscles, but it's also hard to see how it represents anything other than the status quo. Using a previous examples of the team's troubles, Ferrari was in turmoil at the top of the 1990s. It wasn't until Jean Todt's installation as team principal in 1993 that the team really turned over a new leaf. Todt joined the team from Peugeot's sports car project, and in 1995, with returning president Luca de Montezemolo's blessing, was able to lure Rory Byrne, Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher from Benetton, crucially laying the foundations for Ferrari's success at the start of the 2000s. Ferrari is arguably in a similar pickle today. Sure, Todt's success wasn't instant, but the progression of the team throughout the mid-1990s built up to the crescendo of Schumacher's quintet of title successes. The team has already suggested that it wasn't willing to let heads roll in a knee-jerk reaction to 2020 subpar results, but the team arguably needs a new focal point for 2022, as operational errors and now technical troubles have contrived to stop Ferrari delivering on the promise of the past few seasons. There are talented individuals both inside and out of Formula 1 who could come in and galvanise the team. Ex-technical director Aldo Costa, now with Dallara, was touted as an option, and there are many more who would pounce at the romantic notion of leading Ferrari back to the top. Number 3. Bin 2021's development off early and focus on 2022. When Ferrari brings in the new year, it will be afforded the first day of January to shrug off 2020's colossal hangover. Then, the day after, the team should do what it needs to do for 2021, but put the brunt of its resources into kicking the 2022 project into life. The complete overhaul of aero regulations will be one of F1's most interesting plotlines throughout the next couple of years, but there will also be changes to the powertrain rules too. Ferrari has to hit the ground running. First, the teams will have to get their heads around the simplified aero. There will be no more bargeboard developments to mask any shortfalls in the front wing package, and the technical minds will also have to get their heads around the switch from F1's current flat floors to the Venturi tunnel design that will welcome the return of ground effects after a 40-year hiatus. This is why Ferrari must push the boat out for new top-level hires as addressed in point 2, as they can click straight into place for the wave of development for 2022. The cost cap will put Ferrari into an even playing field, but on the flip side, Ferrari has one of F1's biggest expenditures per season, and it needs to ensure that it is reaping a comprehensive bang for its buck with the new rules. Should it continue to sleepwalk down its current path, Ferrari's biggest chance to return to the front of F1's pecking order will have been completely squandered. Point 4. Give LeClerc and Sainz the tools to perform. Ferrari's new for 2021 lineup of LeClerc and Carlos Sainz Jr. is absolutely brimming with promise. Two young guns with boatloads of potential will help to improve the mood at the team, but they need the service from the team. 2021 will be a struggle, and Sainz will be certainly left wondering what he's got himself into at times. But if the two remain patient, wait for the rewards that 2022 can offer, then the Leclerc-Sainz pairing could be one of F1's most exciting double acts yet. All is not lost for Ferrari. The team, the drivers, and we, the media, have to exercise some patience, and the team can still make a recovery from its current doldrums. However, Ferrari must take control of its situation, seize the opportunities it has in the coming years, and capitalise rather than wait for things to play out. After all, F1 waits for nobody.